podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, and to April's Forest Ramble discussion, although it will be May by the time that you're listening to this. I'm your host, Rich Ferraro, and in this podcast we will cover: it's still tight at the wrong end of the table. Can the Reds beat the drop, and how many points will it take to do it? We're going to discuss midfield matters and keeper conundrums. And not for the first time, we're going to ask why so many injuries. Has any other team lost so many players at once? All this and more as we're joined once again by Jeremy Davies with the 1865 sketch. We'll discuss the recent show of solidarity with Hillsborough victims and survivors. And we have another round of our Nottingham Forest quiz. All coming up in this episode of 1865, the podcast which watches every match and is being produced this week by a small black cat. So let's say hello to today's panel. And as we did last month, we're just going to ask them briefly to introduce themselves and who they think will be in the Premier League bottom three at the end of the season. So I'm going to start with you, Tom.
I think Southampton are already gone. Everton are pretty awful, who I think will go because they just can't score, and Leeds are getting beat every week heavily by teams who are not even in the top 10.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. And just to explain to our listeners, we are recording this before the Everton-Leicester showdown. Adam, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I mean, same as Tom. Southampton, Everton, and Leeds. I really can't see any other three. Couldn't even think of another team, especially even us, going down. So we'll see.
We'll come back to your thoughts on that a little later, Adam. And last but not least, Stephen.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, really. Southampton, Everton, Leeds to go down. I think Leicester are going to have just enough to get over the line. And ever the optimist, I think Forest are going to do it and be safe.
Okie doke. And these are brave calls, bearing in mind that we're recording this just after the Brentford match. So you told us whether or not you think the Reds will beat the drop. And in many ways, I wish Maradona in the Midlands was here because he provided the voice of treason last time. We'll go into that in a little more detail in just a minute. But as I said, we are recording this not long after the Brentford away game, which Forest obviously lost in stoppage time, damaging feeling defeat. Let's hear what Steve Cooper had to say after the game.
Did you see enough from your team today to make sure that you can survive?
I see enough every day. Okay, I see enough every day in terms of the application, in terms of the work ethic, in terms of the quality, and in all three games this week we've shown that. We just obviously the game the other night we've got the right result, but the ones the side of that we could have got something out of both of them. But we didn't, so we've just got to keep going.
So I'm just going to, before we come to our panel, I'm just going to contrast this with the report that John Percy wrote up in the Telegraph after the match. Now, quote, "This felt like another self-inflicted defeat with late controversy, and Forest owner Evangelos Marinakis was understood to be furious. Though Marinakis is highly unlikely to dismiss Cooper at such a critical stage of the season, he was seething with the head coach's substitutions and his management of the squad." So, panel, what do you think? I mean, you all think that Forest are going to stay up, but how many points do you think it will take to do it? And what do you think about Steve Cooper's remarks and those reports that were in the Telegraph? And Tom, as you were at the game, I'm going to come to you first.
I think 35 points will do it. I've always maintained that 34 points. It's not going to be as high as in recent years because of I think the World Cup and the timing of it had a bit of an effect on everybody, and it's very tight down there. But then with Marinakis, it's to be honest with John Percy, I mean, he's quite a reliable journalist, and kind of, I don't know if it was the fact that Steve Cooper not dismissed it, but he's just watered it down a bit regarding the John Joe show. I don't know if Marinakis was actually there yesterday, but he might have watched it on a stream or whatever. But with the substitutions, it's one of them where one he come off with looked like his shoulder. Johnson, I don't know what the injury was there, and Danilo went off. So there's your three injured players who went off. and he had to make changes. And yeah, we could have managed the game a bit better, because in the first 80 minutes of that game, Brentford had a lot of the ball, but they didn't really threaten us. And then, but it seems in the last few games, even against Leeds, we stopped doing the right things. So we scored the goal against Leeds, we stopped doing, and then they beat us. Then yesterday we stopped doing those things, and then just invited more pressure on. And I've said it a lot of times this season, we've got to try and get that second goal, because it's a long time. In the end, it was 52 minutes from when we scored to the end of the game that we've been sitting on a 1-0 lead. And with how little possession we have, the ball's going to keep coming back. And then obviously we was down to 10 men because Danilo went off, didn't he? And we didn't have that next phase or whatever for substitution. So whether that's where Marinakis is coming from, and it left us with a bit of an uphill struggle with the last 10 or so minutes with 10 men. But yeah, we've got to, first and foremost, we've got to get that second goal. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but you can't rely on trying to win a game 1-0 with just like 18% or 19% possession against a team like Brentford.
Thank you, Tom. And of course, you can listen to Tom's considered thoughts in the match report, which should be in your feed. So if you found this podcast, if you look back down the list, you'll find our Brentford versus Forest match report. Stephen, we are going to talk about injuries in a little bit more detail a little bit later on. But Tom said in the match report that he reckons 95% of Forest supporters are still behind Cooper. We've voiced our thoughts about social media many times on this podcast, about how it's not necessarily the place for reasoned argument. There's a few vocal opponents of Cooper saying that he should have been sacked. He's making all the wrong decisions. I think the one that people will be talking about yesterday is the decision when Johnson came off to not put on Emmanuel Dennis, who would have been the nearest to a like-for-like swap, and putting on Czech Kouyaté, who really wasn't very up to speed, it seems. So I think we all accept that the head coach, as much as the players, as much as the club themselves, have to bear some responsibility. But what do you make of that kind of type and level of criticism that we are seeing? And what do you make of the assertion that the majority of fans probably are still behind Cooper, Stephen?
In my experience, that assertion's correct. I've not, in all of the games I've been to this season, heard or seen any Cooper out sentiment. There's been frustration with what's been going on the pitch, but there's been no vocal anti-Cooper sentiment in the grounds I've been to, home and away. So, yeah, I think the vast majority of the match-going support is behind Cooper, and social media is very much almost a life of its own, and I think it gets blown out of proportion. It's its own little bubble, if you like, and I think it can be given too much weight sometimes and too much emphasis placed on what people are saying on social media. It's not always reflective of what the match-going fan thinks. I believe that the fans are fully behind Cooper. The City ground on Wednesday night was fully behind Cooper and the team, and look what happened. We had a fantastic result and the atmosphere was brilliant.
And the atmosphere contributed to the result, as Baz and I said in our match report then.
It did, yeah. And it was another example of the fans just getting behind the team and getting the job done. And you can see why our home form is so good. And even though our away support is brilliant, there isn't 30,000 of them at every game away from home, sadly. Otherwise, I think that would really boost our chances of getting something on the road. As for the injuries, I mean, it's getting ridiculous now. What kind of curse have we got over the club at the minute with injuries and players just dropping like flies? Every game we're losing key players. And now there's potential that Danilo could be out, and add that on top of the unlucky injury that Nico Williams suffered on Wednesday night, just as he's starting to play some of the best football we've seen from him in a Forest shirt. And Steve Cooper must be wondering what he's done to deserve this kind of luck.
And as I say, we will come back to that in part 2 of today's podcast. Now, Adam, you posted in our group chat a little bit of an analysis of, if we're working on the assumption that Southampton are in deep, deep trouble and may not get out of it, but you wrote an analysis of the other teams vying for the bottom 2 places. So do you just want to talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick one before I do that, though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why, and I'm not slating the guy, he's just doing his job, but I don't understand why John Percy's posting about Marinakis. What's he gaining from it? Why are we talking about it? Why are we having? I don't understand what these pieces that he's writing are about. Why is he saying, oh, the owner was really angry about the result? Well, yeah, of course he was. He's not going to be jumping for joy, is he? He's not going to be absolutely buzzing that we've just lost 2-1 to Brentford. Why he's not writing a piece that's saying Todd Bowley's not happy about Chelsea losing, or the Leeds owners aren't happy about them losing, or Everton. Do you know what I mean? Why is he writing pieces about the Forest owner not being happy about us losing games? I mean, of course he's, like I say, he's not going to be happy, is he? Like, the more we talk about it, the more it gives it this airtime, and the more it allows people to dig at Cooper, or to potentially, derail the attitude, behind the scenes of the players and the change room, all that sort of stuff. I don't get it. I don't get why he's posting it. Look, he's just doing his job. I get that. It's all for clicks, whatever. But why on earth is he talking about Marinakis' opinion so much? Marinakis is the owner that stuck with Steve Cooper all season. I don't get it. He's not highlighting any other owner in the Premier League and not being happy about results, because every owner's not happy when they lose, surely.
Adam, the thing is, though, he's going to ask questions anyway, regardless. So why make a big thing of it? You know what I mean? He probably has a conversation at the end of the game, and those questions are going to be asked anyway. So, like you say, I don't know why they're making a big thing about that. Trying to make a thing out of absolutely something what might happen after every single game.
Stephen, I'm going to come to you on that topic, and I'm going to assert, and do correct me if I'm wrong, that this is basically the life of an embedded journalist in an organisation. So he's getting this feed, and journalists have to kind of toe the line between putting out stories, but also keeping the people, not biting the hand that feeds, if we put it that way, keeping those people sweet as well. And we've had criticism of Radio Nottingham in the past, that they kind of are a bit soft. It seems as though that's a criticism that could be levelled at one or two of the print journalists. So, Stephen, what's your take on that?
There's a narrative now, isn't there, that Marinakis is trigger happy. And it's born out of the first few years of his time at Forest, with the managers that we got through. And then when you factor in the status at Olympiacos, where they've had 3 managers this season, I think they're on a 4th now, and it all adds up to a sacking culture, and it creates a narrative, and that's a nice, easy story for a journalist to work with and say, well, yeah, Marinakis, okay, he might be unhappy with the result, but Marinakis, who hires and fires managers like it's going out of fashion, he's really unhappy about the result. It's that kind of spin that gets put on it. And I think there's it's too much of a story for someone like said journalist from earlier on to ignore. It's a nice, convenient line for them to take and weave some factual, some facts in there, but weave them into it in a way that kind of embellishes it and makes it seem like a bigger deal than it is.
So on that topic then, as our journalistic correspondent here, Stephen, if we take the assertions that Adam and Tom just made, is it basically a situation whereby news organizations, journalistic organizations, obviously they are money-making enterprises, and yes, they will play for clicks, and they will also know that bad news stories generate more righteous anger and therefore more clicks, and therefore that increases advertising revenue, and therefore the journalists themselves find themselves towing the line between what is a story and what will create publicity.
Yeah, I think that's dictated from it. And if you look at certain publications, I think that might be where that softly approach comes in as well, because they don't want to lose access to the club, because the club's the only way that they're going to get stories to put on their websites or in their newspapers and sell them. So it is that circle that feeds round and creates this kind of journalism. When you look at the facts overall on Cooper's time at Forest, I think Marinakis has been pretty reasonable in terms of he's backed him, he's kept with him. If stories are to be believed, he's even gone over the heads of directors of football to keep hold of Steve Cooper. And I think as a fan base, we feel that that's been the correct decision and the correct course of action. So again, I think there's paper talk coming into it. I think there's a narrative that's being fed into, and it's easy stories, easy clicks, and convenient writing, really. So look at it objectively as well. Steve Cooper is not going to lose his job this late into the season. It'd be a pointless exercise. So why are we giving so much attention to the story? Because it doesn't matter one way or the other. Steve Cooper's going to be here till the end of the season, and then let's just see where we are then.
Adam, coming back to you, before we do your analysis, I'm just going to throw out a theory that I have talked about in elsewhere. Marinakis has kept Cooper in post, not because he thinks it's the right thing to do, but because from a PR point of view, if he sacks Cooper, he loses the majority of the fans. What do you think?
Yeah, I could see it being true. I think the problem is, as a football owner, when you get a reputation for something, then, like Stephen says, media outlets, like, fans and just social media in general, will always see you a certain way. I don't think Marinakis has ever sacked a manager wrongly in his tenure here. I think it'd be hard to really disagree with that as a point, to be fair to him. But yeah, look, I think Marinakis probably, if the Forest fans were okay with it and there wasn't the huge outpour of backing for Cooper, I think he would have gone after the Leicester game. Like, if I'm being honest, the Leicester away game we got beat 4-0, he would have gone then. I think if it was down to the owner, potentially that is possible that he could have gone then. But look, I just as a final point on this, I suppose I'm not slating the journalist in question. I'm more slating the fact that they feel the need as a publication, whoever the publication may be, to come out and say the owner wasn't happy with Forest getting beat this weekend. Because what benefit is that to any of us as fans or to the club themselves? That's more the point that I'm trying to make. And I just don't get it. I really don't understand it. Of course it's for clicks. Of course it's for their publicity. Really easy when Forest lose. The same with the Arsenal Fan TV's videos get 100,000 views when they lose and 10,000 when they win, because people like to see that more. It always creates more buzz. It's just the way it is, but it's frustrating either way.
Yeah. No, I can understand what you're saying. And going back to Stephen's point about weaving in a grain of truth, I think the key line in that bit that I read was, although Marinakis is highly unlikely to dismiss Cooper, he was seething with the head coach's substitutions and his management of the squad. And of course, I think I can understand that, because that's an accusation that's been made of Cooper. And of course, Tom, you talked about that kind of element in your match report. So anyway, let's leave that to one side for the time being. And I say, Adam, you'd written up a nice little précis of what you think in terms of, there's two, assuming Southampton are deep in the mire, let's assume there's two relegation spots, and you've written up a little bit about Leeds and Everton and Forest. Now, before I ask you to go into those details, you haven't put Leicester in there. Tell us more.
I don't think Leicester will be in. I think on the final day away at Palace, I don't think Leicester will be in the relegation sort of final day problems by then. They don't have the easiest fixtures, don't get me wrong, but they do have West Ham at home last game of the season, who I don't think will have anything to play for by then either. So for me, that keeps Leicester up. But that's the reason I didn't keep them in there. I do think they are too good. I think they've got too much quality. But so, yeah, what I put here was obviously Leeds, Everton and Forest, because remember, you only have to be above 3 teams. It doesn't really matter at what Leicester do at this point in time if Leicester are going to go and gallop off into the sunset of staying up. So I put, obviously Leeds have got City away. I can't, going to get beat. I can't see any other result. Newcastle at home. I don't think many teams beat Newcastle at the minute. West Ham away. Tough game. And if West Ham has still got any shadow of not staying up by that point, that'll be huge for them. And I think they'll beat Leeds as well. The game that maybe you look at for Leeds and say, all right, maybe to get something is Spurs at home. However, I did write this when Spurs were 3-0 down against Liverpool. And not now, are they? I mean, they did really well today. And if they produce a second half performance like that at Leeds won't beat them either. So I've put down here potentially Leeds get 2 points, one away at West Ham, one at home to Spurs, but that is the maximum I can see Leeds getting. Everton, obviously Brighton away. Does anyone want to play Brighton away at the moment? They just thumped Wolves 6-0 this weekend. I don't think anyone wants to play Brighton away. They've got Man City at home again. Man City will win every game for the rest of the season. Hand on heart, I think that's what they'll do. We've got Wolves away, tough place to go. Wolves haven't been brilliant this season, don't get me wrong, but they'll have too much for Everton, especially at Molineux. And then they've got Bournemouth at home, which a lot of people, and especially Everton fans, might have gone, that's the game where we do get something. Bournemouth look really good.
Not anymore.
No, not at all. I mean, they're playing with a lot of confidence. They battered Leeds today. So again, I put here that I really think they'll only get 2 points. I said potentially a point away at Wolves, point at home to Bournemouth. But 2 points for Everton at the moment doesn't keep them up anyway. It doesn't even, it barely puts them in touching distance with Forest. So I'm not, do you know what I mean? I'm not worried about that as such. And then lastly, us, I think we'll beat Southampton. I think that Southampton, as much as they're not confirmed relegated or anything like that, I think they're dejected. I think they're down. I think they've showed a bit of fight against Arsenal, and they did go ahead against Newcastle, but I think we will have too much for them. On a Monday night under the lights of the City Ground, I think we can beat a lot of teams. So I think we'll beat Southampton. Chelsea away, who knows at this point, right? At the start of the season, I wouldn't have looked at Chelsea away and gone, that's somewhere where we can get a point. But at the moment, they're just handing them out for fun, aren't they? So I've put we can maybe get a point Chelsea away. Arsenal at home, look, if City have won the league by then maybe it's a good time to play a dejected Arsenal. But Arsenal will probably beat Forest, right? So I'm not going to talk about that too much. And then Palace away, the game that people are earmarking as a must win. I think we can beat them, but I think we'll probably get a point. But for the mathematicians among you, I think Forest get 5 points out of those. Southampton, Chelsea, Palace is the 5 points we get. Leeds to get 2, Everton to get 2. And that might seem I'm being really overly positive and stuff, and that might be the case, to be honest. But for the fixtures I've named, can you really argue with Leeds and Everton getting points in any games that I've not said? Like, if anyone wants to try to go in there, that they might get more points in those games than I think, but I just can't see it.
Tom?
If you look at Leeds, they're being battered by teams who are they're not in the top 10. Like, they got battered against Bournemouth today. I can't remember who did they play before the Leicester game where they got beat heavily. Was it Palace or someone like that?
Palace.
So
Palace, then Liverpool, where they conceded 6, and obviously this at Bournemouth. Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, you can't concede 6 and 5 goals and that kind of thing and expect to stay up.
With Everton, and this is why I wasn't too fussed about Sean Dyche being manager, because what he tries to do is make the game as scrappy as can be to ruffle up teams, and they've just got no quality whatsoever. And I thought they might get something against Newcastle, but then Newcastle started concentrate on their own game and their quality shown. And tomorrow, I think Leicester will win at the King Power, or just with their home crowd. And if they've got Maddison playing, if Tielemans turns up, etc., and Vardy got a goal didn't against Leeds last week. So, I'll expect Leicester to beat Everton tomorrow, which it won't be too bad. Then you just, like Adam's mentioned, Leeds have got Man City and Newcastle next, and I can't see them getting anything out of that.
Well, and Adam's analysis also chimes in with your assertion at the top of the pod, Tom, that Forest will probably be okay with 34 or 35 points because, as I say, if we get a win against Southampton and then draw in one of the other matches, that might actually be enough because, as we've said so many times, all you need is to have 3 teams who've done worse than you in the division. So that's something that we'll be looking forward to and seeing how that pans out. I'm just going to finish this little segment by pointing out that in that message in our group chat, Adam finished off with saying there's so much room for positivity. Now, we're going to move on to a couple of key positions. A little later on, we'll talk about the midfield. But first, we're going to talk about the position of goalkeeper. And this is what Tom had to say in our match report after the Brentford game.
But then he's come to Forest, where we're only getting probably a maximum of 26% possession. He's got to, basically, he's got to be on it for 90 minutes, and that ball's going to come back to him more times than what his experience at the previous 2 clubs has been at. And he makes a couple of decent saves, then he just gets overworked. And I'm not like condoning the saves or the non-saves he made against like Leeds, Brighton, and the game yesterday, but you expect him to do a hell of a lot. So it's that fine balance: is make some decent saves, then he's going to let an easy goal in, and it's just like I just don't think he's that used to being overworked as much as he has.
Yeah. And obviously, Tom, there you were talking about Keylor Navas and the spotlight that's been on him after a few incidents recently that have arguably cost us goals. With both Dean Henderson and Navas, is it the case that, like you said, Tom, that they've just got they've got more to do than they used to, and therefore there'll be the occasional moment where they look a bit ordinary?
Yeah, I do. If you look at, like I said, mentioned on the match report, is that Keylor Navas has played for Paris Saint-Germain, who, no disrespect to the French league, but it's a farmers league. They're with their quality, they're going to win it every single year. While they've got like the likes of Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi, and in there, then we've got Verratti in midfield. And previous to that, he was at Real Madrid, where they've had Toni Kroos and Luka Modric, who are probably pound for pound the best 2 midfielders, along with Casemiro in Europe for the last 5 or 6 seasons. So he's not going to see much of the ball. But here it's just, we're a bit like a colander at times, aren't we? We're just trying to hold water, and just think he gets overworked compared to what he's been used to in the last 10 or 15 years being at Real Madrid and PSG.
Adam, I saw someone comment that the amount of money we're spending on wages for Henderson, who, of course, it's been confirmed now for what it's worth that he's out for the rest of the season. Amount of money we're spending on wages for Henderson and Navas. Why didn't they just offer Brice Samba a mega bucks new contract?
Who knows? Honestly, that is the $1 million question. We all know on this podcast how much I love Samba, and I was absolutely gutted when he left. Look, on Navas, for me, Navas is such a weird one because when people say to me, like, I've got friends that aren't Forest fans, and obviously Keylor Navas is a massive name, isn't he? So they say, oh, how's Navas doing? And I'm like, he's doing, I don't know, like, because sometimes he'll pull off an absolute worldie save where I'm thinking, like, there he is, he's world class, he's a brilliant goalkeeper. And then sometimes he's got this habit to push the ball back out into a danger area, or against Brentford, push it into his own net. And I'm like, I've never seen a goalkeeper so inconsistent for me. Like, and look, we could all sit here and say Dean Henderson stops that one on Saturday. He does, in my opinion, but it's irrelevant. I don't understand how he's out for the rest of the season, and that's probably another.
It's supposed to be 4 weeks, wasn't it?
Well, this is the thing, and this has happened a few times this season where players are going to be out for 3 or 4 weeks and they're out for the season. You know, like, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and I wouldn't like to even go into that conversation. People.
Well, we're going to go into it a little bit later on.
Well, people blaming the medical staff and all that sort of stuff. You don't really know what the problem is behind the scenes, do you, at the end of the day? But I can't understand how he was injured for such a short amount of time with an injury, and it's now going to stop end of season. He won't play for Forest again, even if we stay up. It's a massive shame. But look, Keylor Navas is our goalkeeper now for the rest of the season. That's confirmed. We've got 4 games left. We've got to get behind him. But I don't know, Saturday I think was questionable, to say the least, by him.
Stephen, is it also that although Navas has made some outstanding saves, sometimes when you are a little bit older as a goalkeeper, there's 2 things that can be difficult. One is getting down sharpish, and the other one is springing up. Navas springs up okay, and he does get down to them, but obviously you at the Leeds match, which is one of those glaring examples, Stephen, of where he pushed it straight back into the path of an oncoming attacker, and that's not the first time or the last time he's done it. So is it to do with age as well?
I wonder, are we just getting him on the way down a bit? Because he is, 37 now? Maybe he is on a bit of a decline, but you'd still expect him to do the basics well. And the one at Leeds, the goal against Brighton, those are goalkeeping basics that he's not doing. Don't palm the ball straight out into danger. It's something you can do with your hands to get it away from goal. That's something you learn more or less the first time you step into a net as a goalkeeper. You're told, don't palm it straight back to the striker. You palm it away from goal as far as you can as possible. I think something that works against Navas as well is his personality. Compare him to the last 2 goalkeepers we've had in Henderson and Samba. He probably doesn't have that personality and that connection with the Forest fans that Henderson and Samba did. And yes, it's unfair to judge a goalkeeper on personality, but when there's been mistakes with Henderson or Samba, I think the fans have been a bit more forgiving because, yes, they would redeem themselves with good saves, but they also had that personality that showed that they cared and they were really involved with the team, with the club, with the supporters. And when that's not there, I think we've noticed it. With Navas, he's a different personality, and I don't think there's quite so much goodwill for him as there was for Samba and Henderson, personally.
Okay, well, we'll leave people to chew on that, and something that, of course, Baz in particular has talked about, that element of having a character between the sticks. But we'll come back and we'll talk about midfield in just a little while. But for the time being, I'm going to say thank you to the panel, and we'll be back with more discussions and our Forest quiz. But now it's time for this.
The 1865 Sketch by Jeremy Davies. As Rich and Baz pointed out, Steve Cooper finally addressed the elephant on the pitch, Forest's run of consistently bad luck in the wake of the Brighton game. The old saying goes that it's better to be a lucky manager than a good one. We can still hope that Steve Cooper can show, as Sir Alex Ferguson proved more than once, that it's even better to be both. Although, if events at Brentford are anything to go by, that elephant is going to take some shifting. It is true that relying on luck isn't the ideal strategy for success in football, but there's no denying that it has played a crucial role in many of the game's most legendary triumphs. There is, of course, a well-worn cliché that you make your own luck in sport, exemplified by the famous line from Jack Nicklaus that the harder he worked, the luckier he became. So maybe getting lucky is just down to working harder than anyone else. Well, for all that, footballers rarely leave anything to chance when it comes to getting luck on their side, as the array of superstar superstitions, from going out third in the lineup to hanging on to the same pair of boots for the next game after scoring a goal, amply demonstrate. If Forest do need a 13th man at home to Southampton, relying on luck is probably safer than relying on John Joe Shelvey. Philosophy and football have enjoyed a close relationship ever since Archimedes went for history's first early bath and had his eureka moment. The great philosophers, Plato, Socrates, Kant, Cantona, have wrestled with the concept of luck for centuries. Aristotle identified 2 strains of luck: inconsistent luck, such as a man who goes to the market to get some pomegranates and happens to meet another guy who owes him money and duly pays him back. Thus, the man has achieved an existing goal in going about other business he has set himself, gaining an unexpected reward from taking positive action. A little bit like Ma Gump's life is a box of chocolates analogy. You never know what you're going to get, but you'll get nothing if you don't even open the box. I suppose it's a bit like Forest going shopping in Brazil for skateboarding Gus Scarpa, and coming back with Danilo as well. Yet Aristotle also speculates on the existence of a second type of lucky person, the consistently lucky, who succeed again and again without recourse to rational thought. Sounds a bit like Jamie Vardy to me, even if it's at odds with paragons of football inconsistency such as the incorrigibly rational James Milner or Gareth Barry. Interestingly, Aristotle goes on to speculate that this type of consistent luck could be down to internal desire. In footballing parlance, the consistently lucky simply want it more. A further element in Greek philosophy is the idea of moral luck. Should a person's actions be judged morally dependent on their outcome? The classic example given by philosophers is that two drivers could be speeding in their cars, I suppose it would have been chariots in Aristotle's day, on the same stretch of road, but one hits a child and is duly punished, and the other escapes any moral censure purely because luck dictated that no one was crossing at the time. In other words, we're talking about intent. Aristotle and co. could just as easily have been talking about the handball law, or indeed the offside rule. No one ever intends to be caught offside, right? And what if they aren't interfering with play? Although, as Brian Clough said, if one of my players isn't interfering with play, he's not getting paid. Clearly, no one thought to tell Winston Bohada. Another reference for our younger listeners there. The moral of this particular sketch: if there's an elephant on your pitch, you may not be long for the Premier League circus.
Well, listeners, in case you didn't get enough sports today, here's an ad break that'll tell you how to watch even more sports. YouTube is the new home of NFL Sunday Ticket. And if you sign up now, you'll get our lowest full season price of the year. Just go to youtube.com/presale to get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket. Watch your favorite teams' out-of-market Sunday afternoon games, exclusively on YouTube and YouTube TV. All right, enough about sports. Go get more sports. Terms and embargoes apply. Offer ends June 6th. No refunds.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. And we want to say thank you to Jeremy for a philosophical take on this month's sketch. Now, before we move on with our discussion, we'd like to hark back to the display at the Liverpool match in solidarity with Hillsborough victims, survivors and their families. I spoke to one of the men behind the campaign. Pete, you are one of the brains behind the recent banner that Forest supporters displayed in the away end at Liverpool in a match that took place just a week after the anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster. So you have been in the news and you have told the story, I suppose, of how it's come about, and what I think everyone has respected is the fact that you are doing this with a view to educating people, especially younger fans. But what we maybe haven't heard so much of is how this came about.
Yeah, hi, Rich. Let's just be very clear. It wasn't my idea. It was somebody else's idea, and I was part of a group that ran with it. The idea came out at a meeting of the Hillsborough Survivors Support Alliance, which includes a mixture of Liverpool supporters and Forest supporters. And the meeting had done its business, and the Liverpool contingent got round to how, as I suspect they often do, as to how the tragedy taunting hurts them, how it triggers people. That they're on a weekend where it's been particularly bad, the organisers of that group get a lot more calls from people contemplating suicide and self-harm, people who still aren't able to attend the matches. Then then the talk turned to, how will this ever end? How will it ever end? And somebody else, I can't remember on their side or our side, said, the only people who'll ever end it are supporters. The only people who, the FA aren't going to do it, the police aren't going to do it, the clubs aren't going to do it, it'll be supporters. And somebody else, certainly wasn't me, said that probably ought to be Forest supporters then. Why not it be Forest that kickstarts it? We were there, we've got people who are affected by it as well. It ought to be us. And then the idea of the banner kind of grew, want of a better word, organically from there. We're playing you fairly soon. Why don't we do a banner? And then it became a matter of organising that, which wasn't easy, and getting the funds together to do that. and away we went.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, I mean, the purpose of the banner was about respect to the victims, but also solidarity with survivors. And I think the overarching thing in terms of that message of no to tragedy chanting was also to recognize the fact that these things have a lasting impact, not only on families of those who died, but also there's many, many people who survived. And you and I have talked about this on this pod before, about the fact that there are still suicides. Obviously, after Liverpool's match in Paris, which was so badly handled, there's reports of people who took their life after that. And so it felt like a really important gesture. And as a mark of, I suppose, of that solidarity, the banner was funded entirely by voluntary donations, wasn't it? You didn't set up a GoFundMe or anything. It was people saying, "Ashley, can we chuck a bit of money your way?"
It was, yeah. Your good self included, but people at both ends. People at the Forest end, people at the Liverpool end. Spirit of Shankly, their supporters trust, made a very sizable contribution to that, and were really helpful with getting the whole thing set up, which wasn't easy to manage. Liverpool Football Club were really helpful. But yeah, as you'd hope they would be, but these things aren't a given, are they? Yeah, but it was in their interest for it to happen. But there were a lot of significant people down our end, well connected to the club. Some big social media influencers backed it with their social media presence and their tweets, and financially as well. So it was a good team effort. We actually ended up making a small surplus on that, and the surplus we offered to give back to the Liverpool end, but they rejected that and said find something useful to do with it in Nottingham. So we've donated another £250 to the Trussell Trust, who are struggling in their work with food banks and homelessness at the minute. So it's had a good outcome in that respect as well. If anybody missed out on helping out with the banner and wants to make a contribution, some sort of contribution to feel good about, chuck some money the Trussell Trust way, because they're on their uppers at the minute.
What about afterwards? So what we know is that what was really good is that it was featured in the coverage of the match, and it made, again, the fact that the banner was held up, that went viral on social media, got reported upon. So those are very, very positive outcomes, weren't they?
It was well received. There was media interest from Japan, France, Argentina. It made the national press in Brazil. And I think one thing we wanted to come out of it, as well as sort of trying to campaign, was a bit of self-interest in here. I'm very, very proud to support Forest. I think we're a fantastic, inclusive club, followed by good people, a club that generally has the right values. And it was about getting that reflected. And the number of I didn't get a ticket for Brentford, so I was down in London at Dulwich Hamlet at the weekend. I'd already bought my transport, but I might as well go and watch some football. And the number of people I spoke to who had no idea of my connection to the banner said, God, I hope Forest stay up. They're proper club. Did you see what they did last week? Fantastic.
So thank you for joining us, Pete. And last but not least, if there's anybody listening who has been triggered, maybe from their own experiences, the experiences of people they know, is there anywhere that you would recommend that they could get support?
The Hillsborough Survivors Support Alliance, who are online as they're on Twitter as @Hillsborough_SU1, have people who will answer the phone whenever to anybody who's struggling with it. Get in touch with them. I know that very recently they've talked a Forest supporter down from throwing himself off Lady Bay Bridge. That's the kind of work that they do, and that's the kind of thing that's still going on, unfortunately. So the Hillsborough Survivors Support Alliance @Hillsborough_SU1. They're fantastic people, and they do a lot of good work for their own supporters and for Forest people as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Pete, and it's back to the studio.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Thank you very much. And now back to the panel. So let's talk about midfield. Now, just very briefly, we heard Jeremy's opinions on Jonjo Shelvey there. For much of this season, as well as having Shelvey adding whatever he does to the midfield. But for much of the season, we've been missing Ryan Yates and Czech Kouyaté. Now they're on their way back. Danilo had started to look good, but we're waiting to see if he's as injured as he looked. And in the meantime, we had Remo Freuler holding midfield for much of the season. And in the meantime as well, we let Lewis O'Brien go, which increasingly looks like a foolish decision, according to this particular podcaster. So what's the secret to Forest having a competitive midfield? Tom, is it down to personnel, tactics, formation, or a bit of all of those?
In the Premier League, it's going to be a bit of all of them. But one thing what I've noticed in the last few games is having that legs in midfield, i.e. from Danilo, who's picking up the ball and running with it and wants to, like his goal against Brighton the other day, where he's won the ball, he's given it to Awani and then ran beyond Awani. And I can't remember the last time we had a midfielder who actually went beyond the front man. So with a bit of legs and energy in there, and I think Mangala's stepped up to the plate. And I mean, he still makes the odd mistake, but him and Danilo, I think that in the last few games, I think they've really played really well. And I sincerely hope Danilo, his injury isn't as bad as first stage yesterday, i.e. hamstring injury, and he'll be back next Monday.
Stephen, I mean, for the Remo Freuler debate, sort of raged on for a while, and now it looks like it's been settled because Mangala's playing that holding role, and with Kouyaté and hopefully Yates coming back, maybe Steve Cooper looks like he's going for more of an athletic midfield, whereas Freuler was there almost as a calming influence. What do you think?
It seems that way. And I think when you look through the season and look at when Forest have been at their most effective, it's when we've had a more athletic midfield. We had that period where Freuler was the holder, and then you had Kouyaté and Yates either side being the shuttlers, chasing down, harrying the opposition, and just providing energy in that midfield. And that gave us the best chance of competing against teams and the best chance of getting results as well, because when we were playing open earlier in the season, we were conceding goals left, right and centre, and we looked a mess. But when we tightened things up and we had that energy in the midfield and that controlled energy as well, with Yates, Kouyaté and Freuler sitting, or now you could put Mangala in that position, that's the best way that we're going to compete this season. An energetic midfield that works hard and is competitive will give us the best chance of getting results. And it's been that way all season.
And talking of energy, Adam, the decision to sign Jonjo Shelvey, who's not an energetic midfielder, and let Lewis O'Brien, who very much is, although you could argue that Shelvey's supposed to be better on the ball, but he's also proven to be pretty good at giving the ball away. Now, letting O'Brien go, I mean, O'Brien said in a recent interview with BBC Sport, I have no malicious thoughts about anything that's gone on, and I don't hold a grudge. And although he said he wasn't fine in that spell where he thought he was in exile, he does see himself coming back to Forest. He thinks he's got something to offer. Would you agree with me that with hindsight, I mean, not even hindsight, at the time, it looked like a baffling decision to let an athletic young midfielder go and bring in a sitting midfielder who known for a Hollywood pass, but is also a red card waiting to happen?
Yeah, completely agree. I think that Jonjo Shelvey is, look, there's a lot of words I can describe Jonjo Shelvey with. Look, I think to me, he has got that 60-yard pass in his locker, and that's about it, right? And he snaps into a challenge irrationally, gives away silly fouls. He's gave away penalties. He had the mistake at Villa. I could have a list of things that he's done wrong in a Forest shirt, and I couldn't give you a very big list of things that O'Brien did wrong in a Forest shirt. I mean, the Fulham goal, every time he stepped on a pitch for Forest, he looked like he had something about him. He was energetic. He was buzzing around. He was making it difficult for teams. He's the perfect player to bring on with sort of 20 minutes to go. If he's not starting for us, then I understand that. But if you bring him on with 20 minutes to go, when you want a bit of energy in midfield, you want some legs in midfield, he's the perfect player. And I know you've got a smaller squad, and I get that, but letting O'Brien go to bring Shelvey in is just a baffling decision, and you can see why the man responsible for a few of those, transfers is no longer with the club, because Shelvey wasn't the only one in January that has completely flopped on its face as a transfer.
Yeah. And there's potentially an argument. There's some talk that Newcastle fans generally liked Shelvey, but I mean, potentially there's an argument there, just as Stephen said about Keylor Navas, that we've caught Shelvey on the downward slope, and yet we're still shelling out a lot of money for the privilege of having him there. Now, I am going to leave that topic there for the time being, because we did say we'd talk a little bit about injuries again. And Adam, starting with you, just do we know what the source is? Because the arguments are, firstly, it could be bad luck, and I think we'd all agree that something like Nico's injury, that was bad luck. It could be that the physios and medical staff are not up to spec for Premier League level, and this could also be an argument about, for example, our training facilities. Is that why we're getting so many players with like hamstrings and groin injuries and that kind of thing? What do you think, Adam?
I think the one that makes the most sense to me is probably the training facilities, because and I know with the club doctor and that sort of thing, I don't know, I'm not name dropping it. It's no like big thing or anything. I do know the club doctor, and I know that a lot of the players, when they are treated at Forest and stuff, if it's more serious, to go through a lot of different avenues for going abroad, like Niakate did, or they get treated at Queen's and that sort of thing. So, I don't think it's the way that we treatment is, because I don't know this for a fact. I'd imagine the medical staff hasn't changed much from last season. And there was times last season where Scott McKenna out for 6 weeks, plays on Saturday. Joe Worrell breaks his ribs, back in 2 weeks. So for me, maybe you could just say the players last season just were absolutely desperate to come back, but I don't think it's that at all. I think it must be to do with the facilities or the training, injuries and that kind of thing, or you're aggravating your muscles before a match day, and then when you come back onto that pitch, you're not getting it back out of it. But we'll never know. I think the frustrating part is that if we had no club has an injury-free season, but if we had a much better record of injuries this season, we might have actually been able to find out what our best 11 is, because we're sat with 4 games to go, and I can ask 20 Forest fans, and they'd probably all give me a slightly different best 11 if everyone's fit. And that is a problem.
Tom, I mean, I think that's true, isn't it? Because last season, okay, we had a smaller squad and we didn't own as many players, but last season, the best 11 pretty much picked itself for most of the second half of the season, didn't it? When we were on that amazing run.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it is. Some of it has been bad luck, especially the one for Nico Williams and Scott McKenna, because they're just like
impact
collisions, aren't they? But I just look at yesterday, Nick Carty went off against Brighton, and I was surprised that he was back yesterday. And I looked at him, and his left leg was heavily strapped in the
He's held together with gaffer tape, isn't he?
Yeah, pretty much. A 1E as well. He come near us, and his shirt got ruffled, and you could see that he's got strapping on his shoulder. And because of all the injuries we've got, I think, and how the Premier League is, this is a completely different argument, but with Guardiola, he's trying to keep everybody fresh, and he's got a second 11. We haven't got that luxury. So I think there's players out there who you're trying to ask them, can you just give me that next 10%? And you go and do that, and they're breaking down. Like Danilo, he looked knackered yesterday, and we tried to get that last 5-10 minutes out of him. Can you just give us a bit more? He goes off with a hamstring injury, and it's just things like that. We're just trying to ask too many players to do probably a bit too much because of the other injuries in our squad, and it's just coming back to haunt us. I think the club will have a look at this in the summer, regardless of what league we're in, because it has hampered our chances this season. I mean, like Adam's alluded to, if we've kept the majority of the core of our squad together and have been fit for the majority of the season, we could have been in that luxury place now where we could, going into these next 4 or 5 games, might have been able to rest a couple and if we did have all those players, we could probably rest a couple and have it on a rotational basis. But Steve Cooper's basically left down to the bare bones in some positions so far this season.
Stephen, just coming back to what Tom said there, he's kind of took the words out of my mouth. Just very briefly, this is a strategic thing. Amongst all the other strategic things we've talked about with Forest, the most notable one was that transfer strategy of spending all the money and signing all the players. And yet, when you have literally 12 players out on most match days for half a season, there's something strategic that has to be looked at there in terms of the way the club is being run and the facilities and the way that players are being looked after, surely.
I wonder if we got promoted too soon and the club is playing catch up in terms of facilities, in medical terms, and just for the club as a whole. I look at it and think the more that this goes on and the more that we are picking up injuries with such regularity, it makes me think maybe that our facilities are just not ready for Premier League football yet. And okay, that's not helpful because we are a Premier League team now, but it shows you what can happen when, like us, you get promoted so unexpectedly that you are almost not ready for it. And with hindsight, yes, we probably wouldn't have signed all the players that we did, but we didn't have a settled squad to begin with because of circumstance. So we did need players. And without those players, we'd been in a real mess now because we would have been pretty much uncompetitive for long spells of the season without being able to bring in replacements. So to put a positive spin on it, I hope that this is something that we're going to learn from, and it's an area of the club that's going to develop now off the back of this, because they've got to look at this and really investigate what's going on, because you can't have the players sidelined for the periods of the season like we have, because it's damaged our chances of staying up, basically.
And it means that if Forest do stay up, it'll be even more of an achievement. People will always look at the headlines and the number of players we've signed and the money spent. But yeah, I mean, I would back that up. But anyway, that's it for the discussion, because now it's time for this.
1865, the Nottingham Forest quiz.
The way this works is I will ask 5 questions, multiple choice, from the Forest quiz book written by Chris Carpenter. Our panellists will call out their name if they think they know the answer. Do play along at home. So question number 1. Who has won the most international caps whilst a Nottingham Forest player? Is it A, Nigel Clough, B, Stuart Pearce, or C, Kevin Ratcliffe?
Tom.
Hello, Tom.
Stuart Pearce.
It is indeed Stuart Pearce, who won 76 England caps while he was a Nottingham Forest player. Kevin Ratcliffe obviously put in there as a bit of a red herring. So, the next one. As an England player, how many international goals did Stuart Pearce score? Was it A, 4, B, 5, or C, 6?
Stephen.
5. It was 5 goals, which, as it says here, is not bad for a left-back. Let's move on. Who is the youngest player ever to represent Forest? Is it Wally Ardron, B, Roy Keane, or C, Craig Westcar?
Tom.
Go on, Tom.
Craig Westcar.
Do you remember how old he was?
I think he was 16.
Exactly. He made his first team appearance at the age of 16 years old against Burnley in 2001. And on a similar theme, who is, by the way, Adam, you're going to have to get moving if you want to get in this quiz. Who is the youngest ever goal scorer for the club? Is it A, Chris Bart-Williams, B, Nathaniel Chalabar, or C, Roy Keane?
Tom.
Adam.
Oh, I'm going to give it Adam.
I have no idea, but I'm just going to say Roy Keane.
Is incorrect, Tom.
Chalabar.
It is Nathaniel Chalabar. He's the youngest ever goal scorer at the age of 18 years and 319 days against Yeovil on the 26th of October 2013. Bonus point if you know who's the youngest ever Premier League goal scorer for Forest. I'll open that up to everyone.
Brennan?
Is not correct. I'm going to give you the answer. It was just for a bonus point. It was Marlon Harewood in November 1998 when he was 19 years and 68 days old.
Was that against Middlesbrough?
Maybe. And last but not least, who is the oldest player ever to represent the club? Is it A, Jose Baxter, B, Ted Sagar, or C, Des Walker?
Stephen.
Go on, Stephen.
Des Walker.
Des Walker, and do you remember how old he was?
Oh, he's 39, I think, and I've got him
Just
playing
shy
against
of 39,
Wigan.
Yeah, playing against Wigan in 2004. Jose Baxter was an Oldham player. He used to be at Everton, I think, and so there's obviously a bit of an Everton thing running through Chris Carpenter's questions.
I think it was Dave Besant.
You know what?
He's an outfield player, though.
Yeah, it doesn't say outfield player, but I think you're right, Tom. I think you're right, and so
I think he was 40 odd when he was playing. We got relegated.
Yeah,
I think he was 42, wasn't he, when he left eventually?
Yeah. So I think you should write a strongly worded email to Chris Carpenter, the author of the quiz book. I want to say very big thank you to today's panel, Adam, Tom and Stephen, and to Jeremy also for the sketch. Most of all, thank you, listener, for joining us and for the comments on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. If you like what you hear, please do share our podcast via social media, tell your friends, leave us a review with a comment, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back after the Southampton match, but until then, in the spirit of Jerry Springer, do look after yourselves and each other. If there's any lawyers listening, I'd like to point out we have no money, so don't come after us.
Sports Social Podcast Network.